The courtroom buzzed with tension, a mix of murmurs and the shuffling of papers filling the air. Judge Robert Callahan sat at the center of it all, his face stern and unyielding. He was known for being fair, or at least that's what everyone thought. His reputation as an impartial judge had earned him respect in New York City's legal circles. But today, something felt different. The room seemed heavier, like invisible clouds hovered above the heads of everyone present. Karoline Leavitt stood on one side of the courtroom, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. She wasn't just any plaintiff. She was a billionaire tech mogul who had made her fortune building revolutionary software. Her company, Synapse Tech, had become a household name. Yet here she was, standing in front of a judge, accusing him of something unthinkable, manipulating court rulings to benefit rival corporations, and not just any rivals, but those who had ties to powerful political figures. Leavitt's lawsuit claimed that Callahan had deliberately delayed critical decisions in cases involving Synapse Tech, costing her company nearly $800 million in lost revenue. It wasn't just about money, though. For Karoline, this was personal. She believed the judge had betrayed the very system he swore to uphold. Now she was ready to fight back, no matter how long it took. As the hearing began, Callahan tried to maintain his composure. His dark suit was perfectly pressed and his silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights. On the surface, he looked calm, almost regal. But if you looked closely, there were signs of strain. Tiny beads of sweat dotted his forehead, and his hands gripped the edge of the bench tighter than usual. On the other side of the room, reporters scribbled notes furiously. Cameras flashed as photographers captured every moment. This case wasn't just another legal battle. It was a spectacle. People wanted answers. How could someone so respected be accused of such corruption? Was the justice system truly broken? Callahan listened as Karoline's lawyer presented their case. Evidence piled up, emails between Callahan and executives from competing firms, bank records showing suspicious deposits into offshore accounts, and testimonies from former clerks who claimed they witnessed questionable behavior. Each piece of evidence hit the courtroom like a thunderclap, shaking the foundation of trust people once had in the judge. Emily Dawson, Callahan's longtime assistant, sat quietly near the front row. She had worked for him for over a decade, always believing in his integrity. But now, doubt crept into her mind. Over the past few weeks, she'd noticed strange things: files disappearing from his desk late at night, hushed phone calls behind closed doors, and an unusual amount of stress in his demeanor. At first, she dismissed these observations as paranoia, but today everything clicked into place. After the session ended, Emily returned to Callahan's chambers. The room was eerily silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Papers were scattered across the desk and the air smelled faintly of stale coffee. Callahan sat slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the wall. When Emily entered, he barely acknowledged her presence. "Sir," she said softly, "is there anything I can do to help?" Callahan sighed deeply before turning to face her. There was a weariness in his eyes that Emily had never seen before. "No, Emily," he replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "There's nothing anyone can do now." She hesitated, unsure whether to press further. Finally, she asked, "Do you want me to organize your schedule for tomorrow? Or should we postpone your meetings?" He shook his head. "Cancel everything. I need some time to think." That evening, Emily stayed late to tidy up the office. As she sorted through papers on Callahan's desk, something caught her eye. A folder marked "Confidential." Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it cautiously. Inside were documents detailing secret agreements between Callahan and several corporate executives. One document listed large sums of money transferred to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Another outlined plans to stall certain court cases until specific companies gained market advantages. Emily's heart raced. What she held in her hands was proof of Callahan's wrongdoing. Should she report it? Could she trust anyone else with this information? Panic set in as she realized the magnitude of what she had discovered. For now, she decided to keep quiet, but she knew she couldn't stay silent forever. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt prepared for the next phase of her battle. Sitting in her sleek Manhattan penthouse, she reviewed the day's events with her team. They were making progress, but they needed more ammunition to bring Callahan down completely. That's when she remembered Alex Monroe, a private investigator renowned for solving complex cases. If anyone could dig deeper into Callahan's secrets, it was him. Alex agreed to take on the case after hearing the details. A rugged man in his early 40s, he had a knack for uncovering truths others preferred to keep hidden. With years of experience under his belt, he approached each assignment methodically, leaving no stone unturned. As he listened to Karoline explain her situation, he nodded thoughtfully. "I'll need full access to whatever evidence you already have," Alex said, "and I'll start digging immediately." Over the next few days, Alex immersed himself in the investigation. He interviewed former employees of Synapse Tech, traced financial transactions, and even visited locations mentioned in leaked documents. Slowly but surely, he pieced together a clearer picture of Callahan's activities. The deeper he went, the more disturbing the revelations became. Back in his chambers, Callahan grew increasingly paranoid. He stopped attending public events and avoided answering calls unless absolutely necessary. Sleep eluded him, and when it came, it was plagued by nightmares. He knew it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed around him. So, he devised a plan, a risky escape that might give him a chance to disappear. One morning, Callahan called Emily into his office. "I've been feeling unwell lately," he told her. "I think it's best if I take a medical leave for a while." Emily studied him carefully. "Are you sure, sir? Do you need me to arrange anything?" "No, thank you," he replied quickly. "I'll handle it myself." What Emily didn't know was that Callahan had already booked a flight to Buenos Aires under a fake identity. Using connections he had cultivated over the years, he secured false documents and emptied his secret accounts. By the time anyone realized he was gone, he would be thousands of miles away, living as someone else entirely. As Callahan boarded the plane, he glanced out the window at the city skyline fading into the distance. A wave of guilt washed over him, followed by a surge of fear. He had spent decades building a life based on principles of fairness and honor. Now, all of that was crumbling beneath his feet. Yet despite the turmoil inside him, he clung to one hope, that somewhere far away, he could start anew. Unknown to Callahan, however, wheels were already in motion to track him down. Alex Monroe had uncovered hints of his escape plan and was hot on his trail. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt continued pushing forward, determined to ensure that justice prevailed, not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in the rule of law. And so the stage was set for a dramatic chase across continents where secrets would unravel, alliances would form, and the true cost of corruption would come to light. The plane touched down in Buenos Aires, and Callahan stepped off with a mixture of relief and unease. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of freedom. The bustling airport was filled with travelers rushing to their destinations, oblivious to the man hiding in plain sight. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face and carried only a small backpack, determined to blend in as much as possible. Callahan's new identity, Martin Hayes, was carefully crafted. Fake papers, a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and enough cash to last him for months. But despite his meticulous planning, the weight of his actions pressed heavily on him. As he navigated the unfamiliar streets of Argentina, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone might recognize him or uncover his secret. Every glance from a stranger felt like an accusation. Life as Martin Hayes was lonely. He spent most of his days indoors, avoiding unnecessary risks. His mornings began with coffee brewed in a tiny kitchenette, followed by hours of aimless scrolling through news websites. He read articles about his disappearance, each headline more sensational than the last. Reporters speculated wildly about where he might be hiding, some suggesting Europe, others pointing to Asia. No one suspected South America. Back in New York, Alex Monroe worked tirelessly to piece together clues about Callahan's escape. The eye Investigator had built a reputation for solving cases no one else could crack, but this one tested even his skills. He started by retracing Callahan's steps, leading up to his disappearance. Airport security footage revealed a man matching Callahan's description, boarding a flight to Buenos Aires under the name Martin Hayes. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to warrant further investigation. Monroe reached out to contacts in Argentina, asking them to keep an eye out for anyone resembling Callahan. One of his informants, Sofia Ruiz, agreed to help. A local woman in her 30s, Sofia lived in a neighborhood popular among expats. She frequented cafes and markets, making her well-positioned to spot newcomers. When Monroe described Callahan's appearance and gave her a recent photo, she promised to report anything suspicious. While Monroe chased leads abroad, Karoline Leavitt focused on keeping pressure on authorities back home. Her lawsuit against Callahan had gained widespread attention, sparking debates about corruption within the justice system. Protesters gathered outside courthouses across the country, holding signs demanding accountability. Leavitt became a symbol of resistance, inspiring ordinary citizens to speak out against injustice. But fame came at a cost. Anonymous threats began pouring in, emails, phone calls, even messages left on her car windshield. Someone slashed her tires one night, leaving behind a note that read, "Drop the case if you know what's good for you." Despite the intimidation, Leavitt refused to back down. Instead, she hired additional security for herself and her family, vowing to see the lawsuit through to the end. Leavitt also shared her story publicly, revealing details about how Callahan's alleged misconduct had affected her personally. In interviews, she spoke about her late father, who had founded Synapse Tech decades earlier. According to Leavitt, Callahan had sabotaged her father's business years ago, driving him into bankruptcy and ultimately contributing to his early death. This revelation added emotional depth to her crusade, transforming it from a corporate battle into a deeply personal vendetta. As Leavitt fought on multiple fronts, Callahan struggled to adapt to his new life. The isolation gnawed at him, eating away at whatever resolve he had left. Nights were the hardest. Lying awake in his cramped bed, he replayed moments from his past, the decisions he had made, the people he had hurt. Guilt weighed heavily on his chest, making it hard to breathe. One evening, unable to bear another sleepless night, Callahan ventured out to a nearby cafe. The place was dimly lit, with soft jazz playing in the background. He ordered a cup of coffee and sat alone at a corner table, watching patrons come and go. Among them was Sofia Ruiz, though he didn't notice her observing him from afar. Sofia had been tipped off by Monroe earlier that week. She recognized Callahan immediately, despite his attempts to disguise himself. Hesitant to approach him directly, she decided to gather more information before reporting back. Over the next few days, she followed him discreetly, noting his routine and taking mental snapshots of his surroundings. Meanwhile, Alex Monroe continued piecing together evidence. Using financial records obtained through anonymous sources, he traced withdrawals from offshore accounts linked to Callahan. The transactions pointed to locations throughout South America, reinforcing suspicions that the fugitive judge was indeed hiding somewhere in the region. Determined to accelerate the search, Monroe flew to Buenos Aires himself. Upon arrival, he met with Sofia to discuss her findings. Together, they mapped out potential areas where Callahan might be staying. Sofia mentioned seeing him frequent a particular cafe near her apartment, which matched descriptions Monroe had heard from other informants. Armed with this knowledge, Monroe staked out the cafe, blending into the crowd while keeping a close watch. Sure enough, after several hours, Callahan appeared. He looked thinner than in photos, his once authoritative presence reduced to that of a shadowy figure trying desperately to avoid detection. Monroe snapped pictures from a distance, careful not to alert him. Word of Callahan's whereabouts eventually reached Karoline Leavitt, who wasted no time leveraging her influence to push for extradition. With mounting public outrage fueling her cause, she pressured federal agencies to collaborate with international law enforcement. Interpol issued a red notice, effectively marking Callahan as a wanted man worldwide. For Callahan, The walls were closing in faster than he anticipated. One afternoon, as he walked back to his apartment, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Two men sat inside, their eyes fixed on him. Panic surged through him as he quickened his pace, ducking into alleys and weaving through crowds. Were they following him? Had someone finally caught on? That night, Callahan barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside, set his nerves on edge. He packed a bag with essentials, preparing to flee again if necessary. But deep down, he knew running wouldn't solve anything. Sooner or later, the truth would catch up with him. Unbeknownst to Callahan, Sophia had reported his location to Monroe. The investigator coordinated with local authorities, ensuring they were ready to act when the time came. Meanwhile, Leavitt prepared for the next phase of her campaign, knowing full well that capturing Callahan was only half the battle. The real challenge lay in rebuilding trust in a system tainted by corruption. As dawn broke over Buenos Aires, Callahan stepped onto his balcony, gazing out at the city below. The sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, offering a brief moment of beauty amidst chaos. Yet the calm was deceptive. Somewhere in the distance, forces were converging, closing in on the man who thought he could outrun his past. The days that followed were tense for Callahan. Every step he took outside felt like walking on thin ice. He avoided the cafe where Sophia had spotted him, sticking to quieter streets and smaller shops. His paranoia grew with each passing hour. Shadows seemed longer, whispers louder, and every stranger's gaze lingered just a little too long. The once familiar rhythm of his new life as Martin Hayes was now shattered, replaced by constant fear. Back in Buenos Aires, Alex Monroe worked tirelessly to close the net around Callahan. Armed with Sophia's intel and his own observations, Monroe mapped out the fugitive's movements. He noticed patterns: Callahan's preference for certain alleys, his habit of taking indirect routes, and his frequent stops at a small grocery store 2 blocks from his apartment. Each detail brought Monroe closer to confirming Callahan's location. Monroe decided it was time to confront Sophia directly. They met at a park near her neighborhood, sitting on a bench surrounded by children playing and dogs barking. Sophia looked nervous but determined. She handed Monroe a crumpled piece of paper with notes about Callahan's routine. "He's careful," she said softly, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "But I think he knows something is wrong. He looks scared." Monroe nodded, his expression serious. "You've done great work, Sophia. Now we need to act quickly before he tries to run again." Sophia hesitated, then asked, "What happens if they catch him? Will he go to jail?" "That's not my job to decide," Monroe replied. "All I care about is finding him. After that, the law will do its job." Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt continued her relentless pursuit of justice. She appeared on talk shows, gave interviews to major news outlets, and even addressed crowds at rallies, organized by activists demanding reform. Her words struck a chord with people who felt disillusioned by corruption in powerful institutions. "This isn't just about me," she declared during one televised speech. "It's about holding those in power accountable. If we let this slide, what message does that send?" Her efforts paid off. Public pressure mounted, forcing federal agencies to expedite international cooperation. Interpol issued a red notice, making Callahan's name known to authorities worldwide. Local police in Buenos Aires began patrolling neighborhoods more aggressively, searching for anyone matching his description. Flyers with his photo appeared in post offices, train stations, and community centers. Callahan saw these flyers everywhere he went. At first, he thought they were unrelated, but when he finally recognized his own face staring back at him, panic consumed him. He burned the flyers he found, hoping to erase evidence of their existence, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. The world was closing in and there was nowhere left to hide. One evening, Callahan ventured out to buy groceries, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. As he walked home, carrying a plastic bag filled with bread and canned goods, he noticed a man following him. The man wore sunglasses despite the fading light and kept a steady pace several feet behind. Callahan's heart raced. Was this Monroe? Or worse, an agent sent to arrest him. He turned down a narrow alley hoping to lose his pursuer, but the man stayed close, his footsteps echoing ominously. Callahan quickened his pace, his breath coming in short gasps. When he reached a dead end, he spun around, clutching the grocery bag like a shield. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling. The man stepped forward, revealing himself to be Alex Monroe. "Judge Callahan," Monroe said calmly, though his tone carried authority. "Or should I say, Martin Hayes?" Callahan froze, his mind racing. Denial bubbled up instinctively. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "You have the wrong person." Monroe shook his head. "Don't insult my intelligence. I've been tracking you for weeks. You can't run anymore." For a moment, Callahan considered fighting back, but exhaustion and guilt overwhelmed him. He slumped against the wall, defeated. "What do you want from me?" he asked bitterly. "I want the truth," Monroe replied. "And so does everyone else. Your actions have hurt innocent people, destroyed businesses, and shaken trust in the system. It's time to face the consequences." Callahan lowered his head, tears welling in his eyes. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he whispered. "I got caught up in something bigger than me. Money, power. I thought I could control it, but it consumed me." Monroe didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "I found him," he said simply. Within minutes, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached. While Callahan awaited arrest, Karoline Leavitt received updates from her team. News of his capture spread quickly, igniting celebrations among supporters, who had rallied behind her cause. Yet instead of feeling triumphant, Leavitt felt hollow. This victory wasn't sweet, it was bittersweet. Her father's legacy still haunted her, reminding her of everything she had lost because of Callahan's greed. That night, Leavitt sat alone in her penthouse, staring out at the city lights. She thought about all the lives affected by Callahan's betrayal, not just hers, but countless others who had trusted the justice system only to be let down. For years, she had channeled her anger into ambition, building Synapse Tech into a global powerhouse. Now she realized her fight wasn't over. Capturing Callahan was a step forward, but true change required more than exposing one corrupt individual. It demanded systemic reform. Leavitt picked up her phone and called her lawyer. "Start drafting proposals for judicial oversight reforms," she instructed. "We need stricter regulations, transparency measures, and independent review boards." "This can't happen again," her lawyer agreed, promising to assemble a team to draft legislation. As they ended the call, Leavitt leaned back in her chair, feeling a mix of resolve and weariness. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she also knew she couldn't give up. Too much was at stake. In Buenos Aires, Callahan was taken into custody without incident. Handcuffed and escorted to a local precinct, he cooperated fully, answering questions with surprising candor. He admitted to accepting bribes, manipulating court rulings, and funneling money into offshore accounts. His confession shocked investigators, who hadn't expected such openness from someone so desperate to evade capture. As word of his cooperation spread, public opinion shifted slightly. Some viewed his willingness to confess as a sign of remorse, while others dismissed it as a ploy to reduce his sentence. Either way, the damage was done. Callahan's reputation was irreparably tarnished, and the legal system he once represented was under intense scrutiny. Alex Monroe watched from the sidelines as authorities processed Callahan. He felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing he had played a crucial role in bringing the fugitive judge to justice. But he also understood that this case was far from ordinary. It exposed flaws in systems designed to protect fairness and integrity. And though Callahan's arrest marked the end of one chapter, it signaled the beginning of another, a broader conversation about accountability and reform. Sofia Ruiz, meanwhile, returned to her quiet life, relieved that her part in the investigation was over. She occasionally wondered if she had done the right thing by helping Monroe. On one hand, she believed justice needed to prevail. On the other, she couldn't help but feel sorry for Callahan, a man whose hubris had led to his downfall. As dawn broke over Buenos Aires, Callahan sat in a holding cell staring blankly at the wall. For the first time in months, he felt a strange sense of peace. There would be no more running, no more hiding. Whatever punishment awaited him, he accepted it. Perhaps, he thought, redemption was still possible, even for someone like him. Far away in New York City, Karoline Leavitt prepared for the next phase of her mission. With Callahan captured and awaiting trial, she turned her attention to advocating for lasting change. The battle for justice was far from over, but she was ready to fight it, not just for herself but for everyone who deserved a fairer future. Callahan's extradition process began almost immediately after his arrest. Authorities in Argentina worked swiftly, eager to hand him over to U.S. officials. The news of his capture spread like wildfire, dominating headlines across the globe. For many, it was a moment of vindication, a sign that even those who held power could not escape justice forever. But for Callahan, it was the beginning of a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Handcuffed and escorted onto a plane bound for New York, Callahan stared out the window as the city of Buenos Aires faded into the distance. He had hoped to leave his old life behind, to start anew as Martin Hayes. Instead, he was being dragged back to face the consequences of his actions. The irony wasn't lost on him. All his planning, all his efforts to disappear, had been for nothing. Now he would have to answer for everything. As the plane soared through the clouds, Callahan's mind wandered back to the choices that had led him here. It had started small, accepting favors from influential friends, bending rules, just enough to help them while convincing himself it wasn't wrong. Over time, those small compromises grew into something much bigger. Bribes became routine, deals were struck in shadowy corners, and somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing himself as a judge dedicated to fairness. Instead, he became a pawn in a game he barely understood but couldn't escape. By the time the plane landed at JFK Airport, a crowd of reporters and onlookers had gathered. Cameras flashed as federal marshals led Callahan down the stairs and into a waiting vehicle. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. The man who once commanded respect in courtrooms now looked like a ghost of his former self. Karoline Leavitt watched the scene unfold on television, her expression unreadable. She felt no joy in seeing him this way, only a deep sense of resolve. Justice was finally within reach. Meanwhile, Alex Monroe returned to New York, his role in the investigation complete. As he walked through the streets of the city, he reflected on the case. Tracking Callahan had been challenging, but it wasn't the first time Monroe had pursued someone hiding from the law. What made this case different was its impact. This wasn't just about catching a criminal. It was about exposing corruption that had festered unchecked for years. People were angry, not just at Callahan, but at the system that allowed him to operate with impunity. Monroe knew his work wasn't done yet. While Callahan awaited trial, there were still unanswered questions. Who else had benefited from his schemes? How deep did the rot go? These were questions Monroe intended to explore further. For now, though, he took a moment to rest, knowing he had played a crucial part in bringing Callahan to justice. Karoline Leavitt threw herself into preparing for the trial. Her team worked around the clock, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and crafting arguments designed to leave no room for doubt. They compiled documents detailing Callahan's illegal activities, including emails, financial records, and testimonies from individuals who had suffered because of his decisions. Every piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of a man who had betrayed not only the law but also the trust of countless people. Leavitt also used her platform to push for reforms. She gave speeches, wrote op-eds, and met with lawmakers to discuss ways to prevent similar abuses in the future. This isn't just about one bad judge, she told a group of senators during a private meeting. It's about fixing a broken system that allows corruption to thrive. We need transparency, accountability, and oversight. Her efforts earned both praise and criticism. Supporters hailed her as a champion of justice, while detractors accused her of grandstanding or using the case for personal gain. Leavitt ignored the negativity, focusing instead on the bigger picture. She knew change wouldn't come overnight, but she was determined to lay the groundwork for a better future. Callahan's trial began months later, drawing massive attention. Courtrooms overflowed with spectators, journalists, and activists eager to witness history. Prosecutors presented their case methodically, laying out every detail of Callahan's misconduct. Witnesses recounted how his rulings had cost them jobs, businesses, and livelihoods. One woman broke down in tears as she described losing her home due to a delayed foreclosure decision that favored a wealthy developer. Throughout it all, Callahan sat silently, his head bowed. Gone was the confident demeanor he once carried in court. In its place was a man weighed down by guilt and regret. When it came time for him to testify, he spoke haltingly, admitting to his crimes without hesitation. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice cracking. "I let greed cloud my judgment. I hurt people, and for that I am truly sorry." His apology did little to sway public opinion. Many saw it as too little, too late. Others argued that remorse didn't erase the damage he had caused. Regardless, the jury deliberated for days, before delivering their verdict, guilty on all counts. Cheers erupted outside the courthouse as news of the conviction spread. Protesters held signs reading, "Justice prevails," and "No more corruption." For a brief moment, it felt like the world was taking a step toward healing. But for Karoline Leavitt, the fight wasn't over. Winning the lawsuit and securing Callahan's conviction were significant victories, but they weren't enough. True reform required more than punishing one individual. It demanded systemic changes that would hold everyone accountable, from judges to politicians to corporate executives. Leavitt poured her energy into lobbying for new laws, partnering with advocacy groups, and raising awareness about the importance of integrity in leadership. Alex Monroe, meanwhile, continued pursuing leads related to Callahan's network. During his investigation, he had uncovered hints of involvement from other high-profile figures. Though proving their complicity would be difficult, Monroe refused to give up. He believed exposing the full extent of the corruption was essential to ensuring justice was served. As weeks turned into months, Callahan prepared for sentencing. Facing decades in prison, he spent his final days of freedom reflecting on his choices. He thought about the lives he had ruined, the trust he had broken, and the legacy he would leave behind. For the first time in years, he prayed, not for leniency, but for forgiveness. Whether or not he deserved it, he didn't know, but he hoped someday, somehow, he might find redemption. The day of sentencing arrived, and the courtroom was packed once again. Family members of victims addressed the judge, sharing stories of pain and loss. Their words carried weight, underscoring the human cost of Callahan's actions. When it was Leavitt's turn to speak, she stood tall, her voice steady. "This case isn't just about money or power," she said. "It's about restoring faith in a system that has failed too many people. Today we take a step toward rebuilding that trust." The judge listened intently before delivering his ruling. Callahan was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. The decision sent shockwaves through legal circles, serving as a stark reminder that no one was above the law. Outside the courthouse, crowds cheered as Callahan was led away in handcuffs. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked furiously, and banners waved in the wind. Amid the chaos, Karoline Leavitt stood quietly watching the scene unfold. She felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and determination. Justice had been served, but the work ahead was daunting. Reforming an entire system wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face the challenge. For Alex Monroe, the case marked the end of one chapter and the start of another. He returned to his office, filing away notes and photographs from the investigation. Yet even as he closed the folder labeled Callahan, he couldn't shake the feeling that there were still secrets waiting to be uncovered. Corruption rarely operated alone, and Monroe knew his job was far from finished. As night fell over New York City, Leavitt looked out at the skyline from her penthouse window. The lights twinkled like stars, each one representing hope for a brighter future. She thought about her father, whose dreams had been crushed by men like Callahan. His memory fueled her determination to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in fairness and equality. Somewhere in the distance, a faint sense of optimism lingered. Change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And though the road ahead would be long and difficult, Leavitt knew she wasn't alone. Thousands of voices had joined hers, united in their demand for justice. Together, they would continue pushing forward, determined to create a world where truth mattered and integrity prevailed. Callahan's first day in prison was a stark contrast to the life he had once known. The cold, sterile walls of the federal penitentiary seemed to close in on him as he shuffled through the intake process. Stripped of his suit and tie, he now wore a drab orange jumpsuit that marked him as just another inmate. Guards barked orders and other prisoners stared with curiosity, or disdain. For a man who had spent decades commanding respect, the loss of control was suffocating. He was assigned to a cell with another inmate named Marcus, a wiry man in his 30s, serving time for fraud. At first, Callahan kept to himself, avoiding conversation and spending most of his time staring at the ceiling. But Marcus wasn't one to let silence linger. "So what are you in for?" he asked casually one evening as they sat on their cots. Callahan hesitated before answering. "I was a judge," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I did things I shouldn't have." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A judge, huh? That's rare around here. What happened? You take bribes or something?" Callahan nodded, shame washing over him. "Yeah, I made bad decisions. Hurt people." Marcus shrugged. "Well, welcome to the club. Everyone here has done something stupid. Difference is we don't get front-page news when we mess up." The comment stung, but it also forced Callahan to confront reality. He wasn't special. Not anymore. His name might have been plastered across headlines, but inside these walls he was no different from anyone else. Over time, he began opening up to Marcus, sharing fragments of his story. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt continued her crusade for reform. With Callahan behind bars, she shifted her focus entirely to advocacy work. She founded an organization called Justice Renewed, dedicated to promoting transparency and accountability within the legal system. Her team worked tirelessly to draft legislation, host educational seminars, and partner with grassroots movements pushing for change. Leavitt traveled across the country, speaking at universities, community centers, and conferences. She shared her experiences openly, emphasizing the importance of integrity and ethical leadership. "Corruption thrives in darkness," she often said during her speeches. "But when we shine a light on wrongdoing, we weaken its grip. Together, we can build a system that works for everyone, not just the powerful." Her efforts gained traction, inspiring others to join the cause. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing oversight of judges and court proceedings. Independent review boards were established to investigate complaints against judicial misconduct. While progress was slow, Leavitt remained hopeful. Every small victory reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place. One afternoon, she received a letter postmarked from the federal penitentiary where Callahan was serving his sentence. Curious, she opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Ms. Leavitt, I know there's nothing I can say to make up for what I've done. I ruined lives, including my own, and damaged trust in a system I swore to protect. But I want you to know that your fight matters. If anything good comes out of this, it's because of people like you who refuse to give up. Sincerely, Robert Callahan." Leavitt read the letter several times, her emotions swirling. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as insincere, but another part recognized the weight of his words. Whether or not Callahan truly meant them didn't matter. What mattered was the acknowledgement that change was possible, even for someone like him. Alex Monroe, too, found himself reflecting on the case long after it ended. Though he had moved on to new investigations, the memory of Callahan lingered. The case had taught him something important. Justice wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about exposing truths, holding power accountable, and giving a voice to those who had been silenced. Monroe decided to write a book detailing his experiences tracking Callahan. Titled Chasing Shadows, the memoir explored themes of corruption, redemption, and resilience. He hoped it would inspire readers to question authority and demand better from their leaders. As he typed the final chapter late one night, he felt a sense of closure, not just for himself, but for everyone affected by the case. Back in Buenos Aires, Sofia Ruiz occasionally thought about the role she had played in bringing Callahan to justice. Life had returned to normal for her, but the experience stayed with her. She sometimes wondered if she had done the right thing by helping Monroe. One evening, while walking home from work, she noticed a flyer posted on a lamppost. It advertised a local event hosted by Justice Renewed Dow, encouraging citizens to participate in discussions about systemic reform. Curious, Sophia attended the gathering. Sitting among strangers, she listened as speakers talked about the importance of transparency and civic engagement. When the floor opened for questions, she hesitantly raised her hand. "What can ordinary people do to help?" she asked. The speaker smiled warmly. "Speak up," he replied. "Share your story. Hold your leaders accountable. Change starts with individuals like you." Sophia left the event feeling empowered. Maybe her contribution hadn't been insignificant after all. Maybe in some small way, she had helped spark a larger movement. Months turned into years. Callahan adjusted to life in prison, finding solace in routine and reflection. He volunteered for programs aimed at rehabilitating inmates, mentoring younger offenders and encouraging them to learn from their mistakes. Though he couldn't undo the harm he had caused, he could try to make amends in whatever ways he could. Karoline Leavitt's organization grew steadily, gaining support from activists, lawyers, and everyday citizens alike. Reforms she championed began taking root, slowly reshaping the legal landscape. Judges faced stricter scrutiny, and public confidence in the system gradually improved. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Alex Monroe's book became a bestseller, sparking conversations about accountability and ethics. Readers praised its honesty and called for similar investigations into other areas of government and business. Monroe embraced his newfound role as an advocate, using his platform to highlight issues others overlooked. And Sofia Ruiz? She joined a local chapter of Justice Renewed, dedicating her free time to organizing events and raising awareness. She realized that while one person alone couldn't fix everything, collective action could create meaningful change. One crisp autumn morning, Karoline Leavitt stood outside a courthouse watching as protesters held signs demanding further reforms. Children ran around laughing, oblivious to the significance of the moment. Leavitt smiled faintly, feeling a mix of pride and humility. This wasn't the end. It was merely the beginning. Far away, in his cell, Callahan looked out the window, at the gray sky. He thought about the lives he had impacted, both positively and negatively. Redemption wasn't guaranteed, but hope lingered. Perhaps someday he might find peace, not just for himself, but for the world he had wronged. In the distance, a bird soared high above the horizon, free and unburdened. Somewhere deep inside, Callahan allowed himself to believe that freedom wasn't entirely lost. Not yet.